never believed in curses or haunted places, but when Alex suggested we spend the weekend at the old black farm, I felt a shiver of unease that I couldn't shake. The black farm was notorious around town, a decaying relic on the outskirts of civilization. It had been abandoned for decades, the once prosperous farmland now a barren wasteland. The stories that swirled around it were as old as they were terrifying, whispers of disappearances, of people driven mad by what they saw there, and of a darkness that swallowed everything whole. But we were four friends in our early 20s, full of bravado and itching for something different. Alex, with his eternal enthusiasm for thrill-seeking. Marcus, always trying to prove he wasn't afraid of anything. Jenny, whose nervous laughter usually masked her unease. And me, the supposed voice of reason, though I was beginning to doubt my own sanity for agreeing to this trip. We had all heard the tales, but none of us truly believed in the supernatural. At least that's what we told ourselves. The day we arrived, the sky was an ominous gray, clouds hanging low and heavy, threatening rain. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay as we pulled up to the entrance of the farm. The wrought iron gate creaked as Alex pushed it open, and we drove down the narrow, overgrown path leading to the farmhouse. It loomed ahead, a hulking shadow in the twilight, its windows like empty eye sockets staring out at us. The closer we got, the colder the air seemed to become, and a sense of dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. We parked the car and stepped out into the eerie silence. The farm was dead quiet, the only sound the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional caw of a crow. The farmhouse stood in the center of the property, flanked by dilapidated barns and sheds, their wooden structures warped and crumbling. The land itself seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, a bleak expanse of dead grass and twisted trees. "Come on, it's just an old house," Alex said, trying to break the tension as he led the way toward the front door. But his voice lacked its usual confidence, and I could tell he was feeling it too. The oppressive weight of the place. The door, surprisingly, wasn't locked. It swung open with a groan, revealing a dark, musty interior. We stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under our weight. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of rot and something else, something acrid and metallic that made my stomach churn. The living room was large and sparsely furnished, with a dusty couch, a moth-eaten armchair, and a coffee table littered with yellowed newspapers. A grand fireplace dominated one wall, its blackened hearth like a yawning mouth. Everything was coated in a thick layer of dust, as if time itself had forgotten this place. "Let's check out the rest of the house," Marcus suggested, his voice low. "Might as well see what we're dealing with." We split up, Jenny and I taking the upstairs while Alex and Marcus explored the ground floor. The staircase groaned under our weight, each step feeling like a descent into something darker, something far worse than we could have imagined. The upper floor was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and small, claustrophobic rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, and the ceiling sagged ominously. As we passed one of the bedrooms, I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, a shadow flitting across the floor. I turned, but the room was empty, just an old bed frame and a broken mirror leaning against the wall. Jenny noticed my hesitation and laughed nervously. "Probably just a rat," she said, but her voice was strained. We continued down the hall, my unease growing with each step. There was something wrong with this place, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was more than just the decay and the disrepair. It was a feeling, a sense of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. We reached the last room at the end of the hall, and when I pushed the door open, I froze. The room was empty, save for a large, ornate mirror hanging on the far wall. But it wasn't the mirror that made my blood run cold. It was what was reflected in it. In the mirror, I saw Jenny and myself standing in the doorway. But behind us, just at the edge of the reflection, there was a figure. A tall, shadowy figure, its face obscured by darkness, standing in the hallway behind us. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back to the mirror, but the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "See what?" Jenny asked, her eyes wide with fear. The figure in the mirror," I stammered, my throat dry. There was someone behind us. Jenny looked at me, her face pale. "Let's get out of here," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't like this place." We hurried back downstairs, our footsteps echoing in the empty house. Alex and Marcus were waiting for us in the living room, their faces tense. "We didn't find anything," Alex said, but his voice lacked its usual bravado. "There's something wrong with this place," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should leave." But as I said the words, the front door suddenly slammed shut with a deafening crash, the sound reverberating through the house. We all jumped, our eyes wide with fear. "What the hell was that?" Marcus demanded, his voice edged with panic. Before anyone could answer, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, our breath misting in the air. The lights flickered, and then, with a final sputter, they went out, plunging us into darkness. The only light came from the dying embers in the fireplace, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "We need to get out of here," Alex said, his voice urgent. "Now!" We moved toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut, something strong and unyielding. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. Then from somewhere deep within the house, we heard it. A low, guttural growl, the sound of something not quite human. It was followed by the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer and closer. My heart raced as I strained to see in the darkness. But there was nothing, just the oppressive blackness pressing in on us. "Where's it coming from?" Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The growling grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be right behind us. I turned, my eyes scanning the darkness, but there was nothing there. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the growling stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying, a suffocating stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. And then we heard it, a soft, whispering voice, so close it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. "Leave! Leave this place!" We all heard it, and the terror in the room was palpable. Without thinking, we all bolted for the nearest window, desperate to escape. But the windows were just as unyielding as the door, the glass refusing to shatter no matter how hard we pounded on it. "We're trapped," Alex said, his voice filled with despair. "We're trapped in here." And that's when I saw it, movement in the corner of the room, a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness. It was the same figure I had seen in the mirror, tall and imposing, its face still obscured by shadow. It moved slowly toward us, each step deliberate and menacing. We backed away, our hearts racing. But there was nowhere to go. The figure reached out, its hand a twisted mass of shadow, and as it touched my arm, a cold so intense it burned shot through me. I screamed, the pain unbearable, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor, the room spinning around me. The others were still there, huddled together, their faces pale with fear. The figure was gone, but the sense of dread remained, heavy and suffocating. "We need to find a way out," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "We can't stay here." But as we tried to gather our thoughts, the house began to creak and groan, the walls seeming to close in on us. The temperature continued to drop, and the shadows in the room grew darker, more oppressive. And then we heard it again, the growling, low and menacing, echoing through the house. But this time it was followed by the sound of something dragging across the floor, something heavy and wet. We looked at each other, our eyes wide with terror. Whatever was in this house, it wasn't going to let us leave. And as the growling grew louder, closer, we knew that we were running out of time. The Black Farm wasn't just a place, it was a trap, a prison, and we had walked right into it. The growling grew louder, more insistent, as if the very walls of the Black Farm were alive and angry. The sound reverberated through the house, making the floorboards tremble beneath our feet. We clung to each other, panic tightening its grip on our minds, each of us trying to think of a way out. But there was nothing. No escape, no hope. "We need to stick together," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible above the noise. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a terror that mirrored my own. But the house had other plans. A sudden, violent shudder ran through the building, knocking us off balance. The walls seemed to pulse, the very wood groaning under some unseen pressure. Then, without warning, the floor beneath Marcus gave way with a deafening crash, sending him plummeting into the darkness below. "Marcus!" Jenny screamed, her voice raw with fear as she rushed to the edge of the gaping hole. But there was no answer, only the darkness yawning up at us, swallowing her desperate cries. "Marcus!" Alex shouted, but there was still no response. The only sound was the continued growling, now emanating from below, as if whatever was down there had claimed its first victim. We peered into the hole, our flashlights barely penetrating the inky blackness. There was no sign of Marcus, just an endless void that seemed to go on forever. My heart pounded in my chest as I imagined him down there, alone in the dark, with whatever had dragged him away. "We have to get him," Jenny said, her voice trembling. But before we could even consider it, a hand shot up from the darkness, grasping the edge of the hole. For a split second, hope surged through me. Marcus was still alive, but that hope quickly turned to horror. The hand was not Marcus's. It was pale, almost translucent, with long, bony fingers and nails as sharp as claws. It gripped the floor with unnatural strength, pulling itself up. And then another hand appeared, and another, until 4 hands were clawing their way out of the darkness, followed by a head, a grotesque, twisted visage that looked as if it had been sculpted from nightmares. Hollow eyes stared at us, filled with a malevolent hunger, and its mouth stretched into a wide, gaping maw that dripped with black, oily liquid. Jenny screamed, stumbling back as the creature fully emerged, its body elongated and twisted, as if it had been stretched and pulled apart in the most unnatural ways. It was followed by more of them, crawling out of the darkness like a grotesque birth, their bodies wet and glistening in the dim light. "Run!" Alex shouted, grabbing Jenny by the arm and pulling her away from the advancing creatures. I followed, my legs shaking as I tried to keep up, my mind reeling from the horror I had just witnessed. We tore through the house, the creatures following us with inhuman speed, their growls growing louder, more frenzied. The walls seemed to close in on us, the hallways twisting and turning in impossible ways, as if the house itself was trying to trap us. We reached the stairs, but as we began to descend, Jenny's foot slipped on the rotting wood, sending her tumbling down with a sickening thud. She hit the bottom hard, lying there motionless, a pool of blood spreading out beneath her head. "Jenny!" Alex screamed, rushing down to her. But I knew it was too late. Her neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, her eyes staring blankly into nothing. She was gone. "No, no, no!" Alex sobbed, cradling her lifeless body. But we didn't have time to mourn. There was no time. The creatures were still coming, their growls echoing through the house as they closed in on us. "We have to go, Alex!" I shouted, grabbing him by the shoulder, trying to pull him away. But he wouldn't move, wouldn't leave her. "I'm not leaving her!" he cried, his voice breaking. But even as he said it, the creatures appeared at the top of the stairs, their eyes locking onto us with a predatory gaze. "Alex, please," I begged, but it was too late. The creatures pounced, their claws tearing into him with a ferocity that sent a spray of blood across the walls. His screams were cut short as they dragged him into the darkness, his body disappearing into the writhing mass of limbs and teeth. I turned and ran, the last of my sanity fraying as I sprinted through the house, the walls twisting and turning around me, the growls chasing me, growing louder, more frenzied. I didn't know where I was going. There was no logic to this place, no escape. The house was a living nightmare, a labyrinth designed to torment and kill. I stumbled into a room at the far end of the house, slamming the door behind me and collapsing against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was small, claustrophobic, with no windows and only a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. It cast long, eerie shadows across the walls, and I realized with a jolt of terror that the walls were covered in writing, hundreds, maybe thousands, of words scrawled in a frenzied hand. I looked closer, my eyes widening as I realized what they said. They were names, hundreds of names, all written over and over again, some crossed out, some smeared with what looked like blood. And there, near the bottom, were our names: Alex, Jenny, Marcus, and me. The room began to spin, the walls closing in on me, and I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I whipped around, expecting to see one of the creatures, but there was nothing, just the empty room, silent except for my own ragged breathing. But the grip tightened, cold and unrelenting, and I felt something whisper in my ear, a voice so cold it seemed to freeze my very soul. "You're next!" I screamed, thrashing against the unseen force, but there was no escape. The room itself seemed to come alive, the walls warping and twisting as the names began to move, rearranging themselves into something new, something terrifying. "Stay!" The word was everywhere, scrawled across every surface, the letters twisting and warping like the room around me. "Stay!" I could feel the darkness closing in, could feel the cold seeping into my bones, dragging me down into the blackness that had claimed my friends. I fought it, clawing at the door, trying to escape, but it was no use. The darkness was stronger, pulling me deeper, deeper into the heart of the Black Farm. And then, just as I was about to succumb, there was a flash of light. A brilliant, blinding light that pierced the darkness, burning it away. I felt the cold release its grip, felt the darkness retreat, and then I was falling through endless blackness until I hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the middle of the farmyard, the night air cold and still around me. The house loomed above me, silent and dark, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew what was inside, what had claimed my friends, what had almost claimed me. I staggered to my feet, my body aching, my mind reeling from the nightmare I had just escaped. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew that if I did, if I even so much as glanced at the house, I would never leave. I would be trapped, just like them. So I ran. I ran as fast as I could, through the dead fields and the twisted trees, not stopping until I was back on the road, back in the world that made sense. But even as I ran, I could still hear it, faint and distant, but unmistakable. The growling, the whispering, the house calling me back. I never spoke of what happened at the Black Farm. No one would believe me, and even if they did, what could I say? That a cursed farm had taken my friends, that it had almost taken me, that it was still out there, waiting for the next group of fools to wander in? But I know the truth. And as I sit here writing this, I can still hear it, just on the edge of my mind. The growling, the whispers, the call to stay. I don't know how much longer I can resist,